Well, good morning, everyone. It's just great to be here. It's great to be here again after nearly 20 years where we kicked off the very first conference. And so, wow, hard to even believe, and going through this whole process again. Over a period of time, I've done lots of things with older people, and in the first instance, when I started working seriously and doing research with older people, I was doing a master's program back in the 1980s then, and it was me as a young person trying to get a handle on what life was like for these people who were in hostels and nursing homes and things. And like David was saying, the scene's changed an awful lot since then. But one of the things that's happened is I'm one of those older people, and I find myself sometimes being older than some of the people we're actually doing research with, which is an interesting experience. So, look, chronological age has got nothing to do with it. So, now, where have I... Oh, so, good. This is all just happening. So today I'm going to be talking about our very latest project. And so let me begin. And I must say at the beginning that I actually haven't got any photos of frail older people. I have a sense in which the territory we're standing on is sacred. And I do not want to have people up there on show as exhibits. So what I'm sharing with you today is photos taken with my iPhone in various walks and up mountains and various things and another, but it's all God's creation which illustrates this life journey. And so this very first one, as we begin to look at this journey of ageing, frailty, a spiritual perspective, I've got a picture which I took just down the road from my place, on the beach, seaweed. And what does that make you think about frailty? Look at that picture. This beauty, yeah, beauty. Isn't it? That beautiful blue stuff in the middle there, and the shapes of that. I mean, you could look at it and say it's a mess. There's all sorts of complicated things going on in that picture. But in fact, there's beauty in it. And I think we have to be aware of that as we grow older. All of the things in our life existence come together, or they should do. And so, I want to start off setting the scene. Narrative, story. Already yesterday we heard so much about narrative and how important and how central that is to our lives. In fact, God had a very clever plan as he inspired scripture to be written. It's all based on story. We have God's story. We have the story of the peoples who engaged with God over the millennia, and we have this story continuing today. And so we have narrative, we have the individual, we have the cultures in which these people come from. And I just want to sort of put a few plugs in there. And that first yellow box, orangey box up the top, Erickson, and actually this quote comes from a book. It was actually the extended version of The Life Cycle Completed, where Eric himself had actually died by the time this was published, and his wife Joan completed the additions to this. And in that, he said, since we lack a culturally viable ideal of old age, as civilization, here we're looking at Western civilizations, really good at this sort of stuff. Our civilization really does not harbour a concept of whole of life. And we need a culturally viable ideal of older life. So second on there, about our stories. Our stories define who we are as we interact with others, our families, and the wider society. And thirdly, somehow there is a disconnect between the individual older person and others, especially when the older person becomes frail or has dementia. And so yesterday we had lots of things on dementia, and today we're taking, this session is about frailty. And so this presentation focuses on the experience of frailty. Frailty and the final life journey. This is part of the journey. And in fact, you will hear me sometimes talking about it as the final life career. And it's something that frail older people really understand. And just an aside here, when I first put in an application to the University Ethics Committee for doing this study with frail older people, they had great difficulty with me talking about the final life career. And I don't know, I think they were kind of frightened off. And part of the message that came back to me was they thought that I had made the assumption that older people in residential care might die. So, you know, they're saying, please don't put that in there. Older people won't understand it. But it was actually an agenda of the people who are on the ethics committee, may I say. Okay, so we'll come back to the final life journey at the end. But I just want to put this in here in the first instance, the final life career. And I want to say, I think calling it a career is really good because it's as important as any other part of all our living. It's not just getting rid of us at the end of life. It's about who we are. It's the fulfilment of this whole life journey, and therefore it is important. And so I have there in that picture the path that it's up and down. There's rocks strewn in the way, but there's beauty around that too. And the path leads up and down and round. And so, how do we make sense of frailty? And we've just heard that most people these days, at least in Bethany, are frail. And I think that goes for all other residential care places in Australia, I must say. But we're wanting to get to what is the experience like? And we need to look at the fact that this experience may be different for the onlooker. It may be different for the family members. It may be different from the perspective of the person whose journey it is. And then, of course, how might we respond to the person who is frail? And I say that carefully, the person who is frail, not just the one with the leg or the whatever down in room so-and-so. And I want to unpack a little bit more about what frailty is. And I've just listed some of my writings there on that one. Frailty and dependence is feared by many. And it's interesting that when I did my doctoral studies in the 1990s, and I was, from the outside, still thinking I was quite young, looking at the experience of independent living people in the community. And I expected these people to be pretty fit and to be engaging with life. And yet, all of them, in my first study, all of them feared future dependence, and going out of control. They feared the future and what this experience might be like. Frailty can be the hardest part of life to navigate effectively, and this again was part of what was being written by Joan Erickson in that extended version of the life cycle completed. And issues of suffering loom large for people who've always believed they could change society and many of the expected experiences of later life. And of course, in baby boomer research that we've done the last few years, this was very evident. Joan Erickson, and following on with her work with Eric, constructed a 9th stage of psychosocial development. And it's interesting that these great researchers who worked on the Berkeley studies for all of those years, so often people still reference things that were written by them back in the 60s, and yet they did so much work later in life, and some of their most important work, I believe, was written about the ageing person then, and it's about the life cycle completed. What they were writing about then, the 9th stage, is also related to the work of Lars Tornstam from Norway on gerotranscendence. And so they were saying that the integrity versus despair that they looked at earlier in life is kind of turned around, that sometimes the challenges of later life may outweigh the positives, and so it becomes dystonic. And it's interesting that later work was completed, was published by Joan Erickson when she was 95 years of age, and she died that year. We don't hear much about that. But, and down the bottom of that slide, this frailty can also be a time of spiritual growth as human doing changes to human becoming and being. So all is not lost. The potential's there, but how do we change the potential to reality? So a little bit more of the unpacking here. Frailty is recognised clinically. Now, we heard yesterday how so much of this study has been done with, and particularly I'm not thinking about Sally's presentation yesterday, which was a concurrent session, so not all of you were in that. But most of the work on frailty has been done from the biomedical model and some from psychosocial more recently, but virtually nothing from the spiritual dimension. So anyway, I'm giving you a definition that we pulled out of this. Frailty is recognised clinically as a geriatric syndrome, an ageing sickness syndrome, that arises due to multiple deficits to body systems. And that's just a ballpark definition there. And this next bit is, I find interesting. And frail people are likely to engage in low physical activity, have few social interactions, and several chronic diseases requiring medical care. Now, isn't that interesting? Because if you're frail, are you likely to be running around doing lots of physical activity? Are you going to have the energy to do these things? Are you going to have adequate social interactions when you're perhaps isolated and can't get out? You're either in your home and isolated, or perhaps even lonely in residential care. So, it goes without saying, doesn't it? Yeah, there you go. Around 10% of people aged 65 to 75, and half of all people aged over 80 suffer You know, we get this word suffer. It's the whole of life, isn't it? Suffering, like you're a dementia sufferer or you're a cancer sufferer, although we don't use cancer sufferers so much now. We've kind of got ourselves used to the fact that people can live full lives and have cancer. And so we need to think about this. So these people suffer from frailty, which is aggravated by a lower social status, comorbidities, medication use, and lower immunity. And there's a whole, that was from a review of studies. And so still, what is frailty? You know, it needs a little bit of unpacking, doesn't it? But there is more to frailty than bodily problems. A holistic perspective on frailty takes account of physical, mental, social, and spiritual dimensions. That is, how do older people who experience increasing physical losses and disabilities respond to these losses? So it's not the diagnosis, it's how you live with that that is so important. That's our territory, isn't it? And so that perspective takes in the psychosocial, the emotional and spiritual aspects of being human. And I want to add that little bit down the bottom of something I've been mulling over for quite a few years now. Can frailty, in some cases at least, be seen as lack of nourishment of the soul? Can it be lack of nourishment of the soul? And perhaps by holistic, first-class holistic care, whether it be from registered nurses who are performing not just out of a biomedical paradigm, but out of a holistic paradigm, incorporating spiritual care into their work, as well as the traditional people who work in pastoral care as chaplains, and so forth. And not to forget activity leisure officers and so forth. But can frailty be seen as a lack of nourishment of the soul? And I think actually for those of us who were at dinner last night, and Alan Niven's beautiful presentation there, thinking of that woman in Palestine responding to Chris's reaching out to her, the woman who was, it's beautiful. And so we ask an important question. You know, we have a politician who tells us we can all live to 150, and we won't go there. But the question is important. Can frailty be prevented or even reversed? One of the books that I came across by chance, probably about 40 years ago now, and it was called This Bed, My Centre. This Bed, My Centre. And I've actually managed to find, it was, a limited edition, and I think they were chucking it out of a library at one stage, and I got a copy of it. It's on my bookshelf at home. It's a story of a woman who experienced, she had, from memory, it was crippling arthritis, and she was on all kinds of pain relief medications, and they just couldn't manage her at home. She had one son who was working, couldn't care for her, and she ended up in a nursing home. And she was cognitively functioning well, but terribly disabled. And they just gave her more and more morphine, and it was all in decline. And there was something deep within this woman that made her fight against this, that made her start to keep a journal about everything that was happening to her every day. You'd think this is back, it was about the 70s that she experienced this. And she wrote a whole book on it, and it was on scraps of paper that she saved. And that book should be reprinted, I think, properly, it's beauty. But eventually she managed to escape from this place. And the end of the book, she was in a unit with community services coming in. She was restored as a human being. She'd overcome her frailty, which was partly medication-induced, and she had joined the world again. So perhaps that's a case of reversing frailty. So think about all the things that happen with older people. I've just got an article, and I haven't got the complete reference here, I have it with my other things, but Thompson et al. 2018 examined prevalence of frailty in 4 cohort studies in Australia, and the conclusions for that. And I think this is really important because I critique the biomedical model, but I think we also work across this whole area, and we ignore what happens in the biomedical paradigm to our, it doesn't come out well. But interestingly, they say, if frailty could be prevented or reversed, it would have an impact on a large number of older people. They found that 21% of participants were identified as frail, with a further 48% as pre-frail. I'm probably in that. I'm probably pre-frail, you know. They would really want to treat me. Although research into frailty is increasing, recent medical advances are not necessarily going to be able to prevent frailty. Okay? And then, as yet, little research has focused on issues of frailty and meaning in life. And surely this is critical to the well-being of these older people. And in our lived experience of frailty project, we're seeking to examine the issues of frailty from a spiritual perspective, and the experience of living with frailty may well be different from the frail person's perspective, from a caregiver's perspective. New life. Spiritual growth is potentially possible. It's potentially possible. But that potential may not come into being if they're not the opportunities. I mean, to a certain extent, we are really so much formed by our culture. We're products of our culture. We're influenced by our culture. And just one smaller example of that. When I finished up as director of CAPS, one of my colleagues said to me, "You won't want to be teaching anymore, will you, Liz? There's no need for you to do that anymore." and I sort of, when somebody tells you something like that, you think, maybe I'm past it, and it's easy for you to talk yourself into this, and prevailing issues of ageism around us can actually close down the opportunities that are available to us as human beings. And we have a gift of life, a God-given gift of life, and we need to use that gift that God has given us. And how often do we live our life to the full, despite disabilities and setbacks and challenges and so forth? But do we use what God has intended for us? So I'm saying that, spiritual growth is potentially possible to the end of life. And I'm going to show some examples of where it's happening and where it's not happening as we go in. And there's Sally told me this because we've been in touch with over this project, and what a joy it's been to work with her on this. And she said that she was told from one of the care staff who said, you're going to see so and so. Oh, you won't get much from him or her. And of course that resonated with me, because I've been told that over the decades. And you go into a facility and you say, oh, I would like to see so and so, and a staff member will say exactly that to you. Why would you want to go and talk to this person? They won't talk to you. There's nothing there. Do we really know those we walk this journey with? Do we really know them as individual human beings within their communities? And so we need to learn to see with fresh eyes. Take the scales from our eyes, perhaps like Paul in the Damascus experience. Really seeing the person for the first time. I want to unpack a little bit about this spiritual and the models that we've used over the time. One of the things that was said to me and when I was setting out on this at various times was, religion and spirituality are different things. They're completely separate. And I'm not going to buy that argument. And so I thought, how is human spirituality mediated? Where does religion fit in with this? And so ideally in this we would have interlinking circles, because we're looking at the holistic person, not just a spiritual being wafting around. But we would have body, mind and spirit at least in this. But just for argument's sake, we're looking at the spiritual here. Essentially, human beings are made for relationship. And for Christians, we're held by this triune God in this embrace of love, which is, there's intimacy in this. And this is what God would have for us. And so for everybody, though, this is a generic model. It's intimacy with others and or God. And so this takes in the whole of humanity. Creation, creativity, environment. And so there's the natural environment that surrounds us and how that brings meaning to so many. And there is also human imagination, which comes out of this. Human imagination, which drives all human discovery. The sciences come out of this. And meaningful activity and work. After all, we're supposed to be co-creators with God in all that we undertake. The arts, music, art, poetry, drama, dance, all of these are part of this spiritual dimension. And finally, religion is part of this. And if we have a well-functioning religion, it takes in relationship, creativity, the arts, all of that. And this model keeps changing. The last time I changed it was in 2017. It keeps growing. And I just very briefly want to put these two slides up. This first one illustrates, and I have got a laser there. How does it work? I don't know. Yes. How do I get it on? I can't get them on. Never mind this modern technology. Self-sufficiency, vulnerability is something that was a continuum that we looked at with all of these people, from the time that I did the well-aging people in the community for my doctoral studies back in the 90s, right through everything we've done first. So self-sufficiency, vulnerability, it's a continuum, and we're told in this society that we ought to be autonomous human beings. And we have influencing that. You'll see arrows all around that. We've got provisional to final meanings, we've got relationship isolation, and then if all these things come together, you see that we have ultimate meaning in life at the very core of our being, and it's out of that we respond to the whole of life, and hope or fear will be outcomes of all of this. I've written extensively, and there's books out there on that. But that was the themes that came from the people in my first study. And then I had to sit down with all these wonderful stories of these people and say, what does that all mean? What kinds of things, how do people grow spiritually? And so it came through to say the spiritual tasks and process of ageing, it's a continuing process. It's not just like you do this task, tick the box and move on to something else. This is a lifelong process. And so the thing is not to, and this is where the suffering bit comes in, it's not to eliminate suffering so much as to transcend the losses and disabilities, and of course the other parts is to find final meanings and wisdom, to find intimacy with God and or others, and to find hope. Now we've looked and worked with Christian groups to actually draw that as a Christian model, and we've also, Margie Bean's here, and Margie Bean has actually worked to put this into a Muslim context as well, in spiritual tasks and process. I don't have time to go any more of that at the moment, but I'll just move on. And so the project, Finding Meaning in the Experience of Frailty. The aim of the project, just quite quickly, to explore the lived experience of frail older people and the final life journey towards dying and death. And I'm focusing just on a few things in this presentation because the amount of rich data we have from these stories is, you'd be here all week. We're still going. So we're going to look at some of the hardest things, where they found meaning, developing inner strength and so forth. These findings will inform aged care practice of nurses, activity office, pastoral care providers, other care providers for the final life career in palliation, more specifically end-of-life care, especially spiritual care. And in this study that I'm reporting on this morning, or using some of the data from, is of the stage 2 of 24 older people aged 71 to 102, and Sally gave some of the stats yesterday that I won't go into. We had multicultural, multi-faith, no faith affiliation, able to speak English, cognitively competent. It was a mixed method study with survey and in-depth interviews. And we're very indebted to Catholic Healthcare for their wonderful support in this project. It's been great, and we did get through ethics, you'd be pleased to know. Findings from the in-depth interviews. I'm not going to talk about the survey at all this morning. Obviously, loss and disability was experienced by all of the participants, and their responses to what they experienced differed. Finding final meaning was seen in examples of hope, peace and joy, which would be linked to inner strength. And perhaps most importantly, this thing about inner strength, I'm going to focus on this quite a bit. And so I'll just leave it for now and come back. And may have important clinical implications for care and wellbeing. And it's actually interesting because just during this process of research and qualitative research, you're collecting your data, you're sitting with people, you're listening to their stories, and then you're going back to the literature again, and you're dipping in and out of the literature to see what other knowledge there is out there. And you know what we've found in Norway, they've been doing some great things there. Some of their nurses have been working, and Bowman, Atel, have been working in this field with frail older people from a nursing perspective, and finding mental health and well-being in frailty, and they were using this construct of inner strength as well. So that was confirming what we were doing. Now I want you to just look at this bush, and you'll see it moving. You'll see this small bush. This bush was up a mountain on the Greek island of Santorini, and I was climbing up this mountain on an archaeological tour. And it was just, you can see the roots there just coming out of the crevice in the rocks. And you can see that it's gnarled, it's twisted. There are all sorts of things that this bush, little bushes, has experienced in its, how old is it? I don't know. But it made me think of the life journey and how we engage with life, and how tenacious and resilient we can be in this process. And so I'm going to be talking about these issues, about the things that are hard but also keep us going. And so the question, and this was a really important question for people, what is hardest for you? What is the hardest thing for you now? And, sometimes I've been told that you shouldn't ask these kinds of questions of older people. You should ask things that make them happy. Don't go to these things. And yet, this is gold. This is gold. And you don't beat about the bush. You say, can you tell me what is hardest in your life? And some of these frail older people, and they were carefully chosen by the staff of Catholic Healthcare to be people who really had significant levels of frailty. And some of them didn't find anything hard at all. They weren't sufferers. But it's a spiritual question. Some of the responses related to decreasing mobility and having to use a walker or not being able to move at all. Another one, and we have pseudonyms. We've created new identities for everybody because they weren't going to be a number or a letter or something. They were real human beings. Having control of your health, from Jack. And Clement. And this is an interesting comment from him. Give me the strength to be in here, because I can't change. I can't change things. I can't go out. I can't go for a walk or something like this. I can't do anything. But at least I have my brain. I can think the way I want to think. And of course, what he's saying has problems for me too, because he's saying, I'm not like them who don't have a brain. So that's a problem. But it's a way he's managing his situation at this point in time. And down the bottom there I have, others found it hardest to be alone in residential care. Alone in residential care. And even when you have an activity room full of activities, people can still feel alone because there is no actual interpersonal connection between the people. Nothing meaningful. It's full of busyness and activity, but not meaningful. And this one. This woman, what is hardest for you now? For her was this was Sophie, getting another disability on top of the number of conditions the person already has. Sophie lives with, it's an acoustic neuroma and its complications, which were many, for more than 40 years, and now she has Parkinson's as well. She is very, very disabled. And she said, well, I suppose at the moment I've tried to live with the neuroma and all that went with that. And this neuroma, which struck her earlier in life, has meant that all her dreams and hopes for the career, and Sally's nodding at me, all her dreams and hopes for her life career were just gone. And yet she's kept on. I've tried to live with the neuroma and all that went with that. Now it's trying to live with this new illness, this Parkinson's, and all that entails. I try. And people say, oh, take your time, do this, do that, and do that. They just don't know how hard it is to I am taking my time as much as I can. But yes, that's the hardest thing now. But there is more. And this, when you look at this little, what is it? It's a dill plant, I think, growing up on the mountain in Santorini. Do you know what that makes me think of? It makes me think of the cross. And yet behind that the end of season, that fragile plant, there's seeds on it which will come to bear with the new being that comes in the next season. And that beautiful light in the sky behind that. And here we come to inner strength. And I'm giving you just a summary of the responses here. Faith. Faith in God, belief in God, family, control or out of control. Interior tranquility, which was a word used by one of the women who was a religious, and she's using the language that she understands. Maybe a lot of the others wouldn't know that. And she said, it's been with me the whole time. Another saying, maybe God, but this person really hasn't got a real relationship with a living God, and they say also it's hard to believe. Another one, I don't know, I just do it. God gives the strength from another. And often it's that self-awareness of the increasing vulnerability that stimulates the growth of inner strength and self-transcendence. And of course, the whole word self-transcendence, we couldn't ask people, where do you find self-transcendence? They hadn't studied theology or, this. So what do you ask them? And one of the words that older people were asking when I was doing the preliminary study, they kept using this word, I have the strength, I have the inner strength to do this, to make it through, to get through this. And it seemed that word inner strength was something that these people really understood. And so we deliberately asked them about where they found this inner strength in this study. And I think this is a key part. And I want to say, and I've probably got somewhere else too, I want to say that inner strength is not about coping. And I want to throw a little bit of, coping is not what we're about when we're looking at spiritual care. Coping is a psychological construct that really just helps us over a particular situation, and it tends to be more, it's a behaviour, and it can work for this thing, but it's not something which comes from the core of your being. Inner strength comes from what you are at your depth. And here are some of the things. It can take various shapes. Margaret says, I suppose basically just trusting God. I mean, he's there all the time, and you know that God's the Father. He loves us. He's not going to test us beyond our means. So whatever happens, you just trust, and I think you can get through it. And so it's applicable across all parts of your life, this inner strength. It's not specific to a particular situation. Now, Helen says, but I guess I've really accepted the fact that I'm dying. And I'm very comfortable with that. So now I'm just enjoying the trip. Okay? Isn't that a lovely place to be at? In the midst of the frailty and the difficulty. But there's hope in that too, isn't there? And Santhi. But it was not that hard. I was laughing about it because in the Holy Quran there is a chapter, this is in English also, you can read it, that God never gives you that much burden which you are not able to carry. And so other themes, and you can see them, there's quite a number of them there that go to that. And I just want to go down to the bottom item there. The question that we asked, what is God like? What is God like? We asked everyone. We had atheists in our study too, and we asked them, what is God like? What do you think God is like? And they all gave a response. And, you know, they told us, and in some cases they told us what the God they thought, if they thought there was a God, this is what God would be like. And I say, well, you know, I probably wouldn't believe in that one either. But they did, you know, they responded to that question. And so I wouldn't be saying, we're not about proselytising, we're not going out there and saying, do you believe in God? Are you saved? But we're saying to these people as an entry point, we don't know anything about their backgrounds, but what do you think God is like? Because that can throw an enormous amount of knowledge up there about how you can begin to encounter and connect with this person, this other human being. And so here I thought I would put some thistles in there. That's also up in Santorini. Inner strength is more than coping. A person who has inner strength will bring that strength to face any situation in their lives. The concept of coping is usually situation-specific, a behaviour in contrast to inner strength, a way of being, a meta-change in life. And embracing suffering. Can we embrace suffering? Is it something that when things are tough, and you know, we're really exploring this, and this was a prickle bush that I put up here. That was, so increase in vulnerability may stimulate a change of being and becoming, to work through vulnerability. And it's the change in the meta framework of being more than coping. It's encompassing physical, mental, social and spiritual, and embraces the whole life journey. Finding the final life career, learning to see through new lenses. It's through struggle and loss of previous abilities and relationships that new hope is born. And these factors lead to inner strength. Self-transcendence. Matters of meaning. And here I quote Viktor Frankl. Finding meaning in each and every situation of living is essential to flourishing and well-being. Potentially at no stage in life is meaning lost. However, numbers of people fail to see meaning in their lives, and lack of meaning is a major factor in suicides, especially in life suicides. It's an important topic to explore with these frail participants. Meaning or purpose. There's a subtle difference in the meaning of, we ask people, where do you find meaning? And sometimes, if a person really is on that agenda, they will talk about their life meaning, and often it's about deep relationships with others and or God. But some of these people took this to be an external thing, and they looked at it as more as, they're saying, what is the meaning of life? Not I have a meaning, but what is the meaning of life? And coming out of this, signs of inner strength. Ruby here, blessings and grace. She said, so really, I've got a million things to be thankful for. So why would I complain? I'm truly blessed, honestly. And so this developing inner strength and self-transcendence, it's an important aspect associated with self-transcendence or self-forgetting, that Frankl used that term, which I think is rather a lovely term. It's a pathway towards peace, hope and joy. And I was going to talk more about joy, but I thought I'm never going to get through this in the time. The person who has a sense of inner strength will readily respond to the positive from that question, seeming almost to confirm their deep sense of strength and well-being. And the greatest of these is love. We love because he first loved us. The ways that participants respond to and show love in their lives. And it's interesting, I was sort of sitting back, we had all this data on in vivo, and we had masses and masses of files and stuff, and I thought, love, it keeps coming up. I'm going to do a word search on this. And so I did the whole thing on it. And these are just examples. And we need to do more on this and write about it. But these are these frail older people. Ruby, I adore you, my God. I love you with all my heart. Arthur. And pick these. Remember the big blue circle I had with the different ways that we respond to the spiritual, the environment, relationship, environment, the arts, religion. Arthur says, I love to see the jacarandas when they come out. Will he ever see the jacarandas again? I don't know. I love the colour. I love the colour of the vestments the priests wear. I love the music. The music is just, I told you, on Easter Day, they sung a whole Schubert Mass. Margaret, I love being with people, with friends. Helen, I just know that I'm loved. Not because I've earned it, it's his free gift. Nancy, I love kids. Fred, oh, I love singing. I just definitely love singing. And Xanthi, then in our religion, Muslim, it is true. It is creation of God, and God is the creator. So we have to love the creation of God, the creator. I've tried to put all these together, and as you possibly would be aware, models change and things as one gains new knowledge. So here we have it at the moment. The theme was self-sufficiency versus vulnerability with these very frail people, and they're very much towards the end of vulnerability. Increasing frailty, which is due to increased disability, losses, multiple chronic conditions, lower energy. And we've got off to the side there, we have choices, and we always have choices in life, but we don't always recognise that we have choices. We have a choice to embrace frailty, and some of those examples I have given, people have embraced their frailty, which stimulates further spiritual growth, or to deny frailty, which blocks spiritual growth. And if you take the arrow down from increasing frailty due to through to spiritual task, the spiritual task and process is to transcend the losses and disabilities, I've got a whole heap of stuff on humour and laughter I did a word search on laughter too, massive amounts of it from these frail older people. So humour and laughter have an effect on this and outcomes. Finding meaning leads to inner strength. Inner strength produces freedom, hope, love, peace and joy, and increases the likelihood that the person will be able to face any particular circumstance in life. And so the final life career, as important of all life stages have gone before, and all of the following may be present. Struggle. It's not just all happy things. Struggle, inner strength, hope, peace, love, joy, searching and finding meaning, potentially to the end of life. Spiritual care, support, affirming each person in their narrative, being present, resisting judgment of the other, honouring, supporting. New life may be possible where meaning is found, and the final life career may be enhanced beyond all expectations. And so, I thank you